So, Adolescence. If you have not seen it, please go watch it and then come back to join this conversation. A lot has been discussed about this series, from the cinematic decisions and how it was shot to the content. I think that it was a fantastic series. I agree that it was shot and acted incredibly well. My critiques here are just that I don't think it does what many people seem to be suggesting it does or even want it to do. A great deal of the conversation is, I think, overdetermined by a sentiment that seeks to place boys, men, and masculinity at the center of a need for empathy. And this actually performs a patriarchal function that can be instructive to us about how modernity literally seems not to always be able to see girls and women. One moment that stands out to me is when detectives Luke Bascom and Misha Frank discover the meanings behind some of the emojis that Katie used to respond to Jamie, suggesting that he was an incel. The detectives clearly know who some of the manosphere idols are and a little about what that entails. However, somehow they come to the conclusion that this means Katie bullied Jamie. Even after finding out that partially nude photos of Katie had been leaked and circulated, somehow Jamie becomes the locus of the conversation, both in the show and external to it. Katie disappears in all but name and appears more as an unfortunate incident that happens to Jamie and his family. As a matter of fact, and I do find this quite interesting, a single voice and body seems to try to forcibly enter Katie back into our field of vision. Her best friend Jade, played by Fatima Bujang, who at the time of writing this is not featured as a cast member on the Google page or the Cosmopolitan and Elle articles that are situated at the top of the cast search and purport to name the entire casts of the show. This is both telling and expected. If white girls are hard to see, then black girls are literally invisible, both in this series and in the real life media produced around it. And this is a fascination of mine when it comes to the portrayals of black people and their treatment in and out of these shows and movies. With all the interest taken in the real life actors behind and the roles of Jamie, his father, D.I. Bascom, and Brittany the psychologist, why are we not more interested in Jade? Her relationship to Katie, her anger, and the fact that she is the only girl or woman in the entire series who wields violence, and in a way that seeks to enter her best friend back into consideration, a way that seeks retribution, as even Katie's family is never pictured or seen. But also in a series that features and seeks to understand the unseen and seen violence of males. What about Jade made her violence appropriate to the story? How is her violence a seeming fit within the theme of masculinist violence? Why does it garner no interest? And does this perform the particularly anti-black function of ungendering? I'm still sitting with this last question. And while we sit with it, I also want to consider the choice of perspective. I was glad to see the call out of the propaganda in this series by the content creator who goes by The Storyteller. Please check out that video. A great deal of what we see is from the perspective of Detective Bascom. Why? Why do we need a cop's perspective? And why is this cop black? This is not and can never be a neutral decision. Black people in the roles of cops, presidents, founding fathers often serve one purpose: to absorb the violence of the institution or institutions they represent, absolving them of their past inheritances and how they act on them and make manifest in our modern world antebellum and colonial relationships. Why not a teacher's perspective? Jamie's father's perspective? Katie's perspective? Jade's? What we get is a sort of secondary and subliminal arc that uses a black man to bring humanity to the police as he struggles to connect to his own son, who is obviously truly being bullied. And let me qualify this statement by saying that I believe that what constitutes bullying is exhibited in the case of Adam Bascom. However, a girl, Katie, responding to a boy, Jamie, who expresses an interest in her after her photos have leaked does not, by calling him an incel and questioning his motive, make her a bully. She is reacting to a power dynamic and social schema that seeks her abasement. And this dynamic is one that the series, possibly unintentionally, exhibits in its very form. One of the best videos that I've seen offering analysis on adolescence is by the YouTube channel Aphrodisia. In it, she mentions how all of the women are expected to manage the emotions of the men. Brienne sits in silence and composure as she is subjected to the emotional swings of Jamie. And despite the fact that all of them have to deal with the fallout of the allegations against their family member, it is Jamie's father who gets to act out his rage, sadness, confusion, insecurity. His daughter and wife are largely silent as they respond and seek to placate and manage his emotional vacillations. It is his tears that move us. So, I've mentioned the storyteller and Aphrodisia as commentators on this series that you should definitely watch. But I'd actually suggest watching some of the reactionaries respond to this as well. One of the talking points that I've seen uttered most vociferously has been that of an apparent race swap. In general, no one ever has anything to say about race swapping unless the character goes from white to black. These people, however, cite similar cases that have happened but were perpetrated by black boys. In many ways, I think that what people are saying without being so explicit about it is that it is much easier to imagine a black boy being a monstrous killer of a white girl than a little innocent-looking white boy. Innocence and safety are the pinnacles of white childhood, and black boys are often constructed not just as always adults, but as monstrous. Innocence, and therefore childhood, girlhood, and boyhood are denied. This is another ungendering project, and I do not think that this series can be disaggregated from these projects. As a matter of fact, by erasing Katie, invisibilizing Jade, and relegating most of the female characters to handlers for their male counterparts, and by upholding Jamie as a figure of assumed innocence and a figure that demands empathy and understanding from us, the series actually perpetuates the issues. And maybe this was intentional. Maybe the creators sought to utilize both content and form to make a broader point, but I'm also not sure of this. I think that trying to redeem the police, making fathers magical necessities in boys' lives, implicating Katie as a bully to, in the director's words, not point a finger at any one thing or person, and all the calls for understanding and empathizing with boys and men all seem like a project to redeem masculinity. And that project is not one that can address the violence that is sometimes expressed. Commentary from masculinists and those who love and want them is predictable, but I find that commentary from those that understand patriarchy and its manifestations, such as policing, and those who are critical of gender and gendered norms, and those who are written out of them, like black people, are still not brave enough to ask the more radical questions. So much of the concern is on how we reach out to boys, how we make them feel valued, how we teach them not to feel entitled, how we make sure they get less screen time. Maybe the question we need to be asking is, what happens if we stop raising boys? I can hear the pitchfork sharpening now. But let me offer you a quick little anecdote from my own life. A few months ago, I was chatting on someone's thread on Facebook, I believe. Another man responded with, "It sounds like you had two mothers." Like, ooh, you really showed me. Thing is, I have a father who wouldn't be offended by that statement. He doesn't see anything in mothering that depletes anything that he is. He doesn't see fathering as something to be defined as oppositional to mothering. As a matter of fact, we might say that in many ways, he actively refused some of what we call fathering and mothered instead. Last year, a few of my favorite thinkers on Twitter caused an uproar by saying, "Abolish men." I didn't see what was so upsetting. I mean, let's say that even if they meant getting rid of all of us who have certain anatomical features, the species would come to an end. And that would end our rather parasitic and anxiety-inducing reproductive imperative. However, the call didn't seem to be to eradicate all those of us who identify as men, but rather to rid us of boyhood, manhood, and masculinity. The latter of which I feel is always toxic. My thinking goes thusly. Whenever we describe what a healthy masculinity is, it seems to me that we describe behaviors and modalities of existing that already have a place and home within what we call femininity. As it actually seems like femininity is a wide open catch-all for everything that masculinity decides it's not. Femininity is therefore more abundant than the strictures of masculinity. And if femininity became the home of everyone, we necessarily abolish femininity, womanhood, and girlhood too. And I think that this is where the imaginative project and a more liberatory project, even though not so much for Black people, gets rejected. We've internalized and have even naturalized gender to the point that it seems like an innate characteristic that reasonably shapes how we build relationships and societies. But we know through the work of historians, anthropologists, philosophers, legal scholars, Black critical thinkers, and cultural gatekeepers that this idea that there are only two genders, or that genders are a necessary part of identification and group organization, can widely be contested by looking outside of modernity. But I would argue that both men and women want gender too much. And what is supremely frustrating and even silly about that, especially to those of us who fail or refuse gendered norms and in most ways don't aspire to them, is that while thought to be complementary, men and women aren't even constructed to like one another. In psychoanalysis, the position of the feminine is possibly antagonistic to the masculine position, undoing it. But more on that another time. I get it. Men and boys are suffering. And girls and women suffer as they are made to be the vessels where we put our suffering. But it's because of a kind of fealty paid to this regime of masculinity that has been erected. And yes, women do pay tithes to the cult of masculinity. They understand that they must often participate within this patriarchal matrix in order to fulfill the obligation of the reproductive imperative, and even to protect themselves. But men do not need women to maintain this hegemony. Even if women tell us that they don't need or even want us to be domineering, that they don't want us to have to protect them, that they want to hear what we have to say, that they want to experience our gentleness. Men perform for the gaze of other men, all to convince one another that they have not succumbed to what we might call castration. All the while, the very act of trying to prove this kind of makes it obvious that you have been. Perfect example. In this clip, this woman tells him exactly what she and those in her inner circle are looking for in a man.
Modern day women just don't qualify for the top tier men, and that is the truth.
You believe you're a top tier man? By what standard?
I'm 6'4", only about what? 8% of the entire world is 6'4". I make well over 100K a year, and I'm Black at that if you add that on. So just if we're speaking about those figures, the things that women are attracted to, I'm not going to toot my own horn, but I'll let you do the math.
Hold on, before we go, what's your math saying?
The conversation and the words that are coming out of the mouth of someone like you, I would never consider top tier. A top tier man is also a man that is extremely desirable by way of his character. A top tier man is a man who displays a certain level of intellect that allows him to consider other people. A top tier man, they lead with love, not with dictatorship, right? They don't want to control their woman. They want to gently lead their woman. A top tier man creates space for a woman to feel good about herself. A top tier man supports the dreams and the ideas of a woman. A top tier man prioritizes a woman. A top tier man is in leadership and working as hard as he is to give the woman the life of her dream.
And with all that stuff that you just said, that was just womanese talk.
Womanese is also 6'4", Black, attractive. I don't know too many women in my circle who desire a 6'4" man still wearing braids.
To me, as a man, I'd say thank you. If the goal is to fulfill the obligation to relate and maybe reproduce, I listen and perform to the expectation, as what she offers doesn't even really ask one not to be a proper man. Her wishes still lie within the domain of patriarchal masculinity. She still speaks of a man as leading his woman and as the party that makes her dreams possible, that provides for her. He, however, dismisses all of this free advice as womanese, precisely because his concern was never her or any woman for that matter. Like, being cis and heterosexual must be quite frustrating, especially together. There is just so much suffering. So again, I ask, instead of thinking about how we empathize with boys, value boys, love boys better, and get ahead of the dangerous messages that arise out of the modern gender matrix and are everywhere, not just online, let's truly think through what it might look like to bring an end to boys, men, and masculinity. I mean, it doesn't make sense to arrange our lives, determine our social relations, and even to decide how we carve out space for what actually constitutes very minute differences in the capabilities and capacities of varied bodies. Bodies that come in much more than two varieties. We can see the ridiculousness of this notion if we were to choose anatomical features that we don't care about as much. Say, separate driving lanes or dining rooms for people with, I don't know, big feet. My fear is that we've invested so much in what it means to be gendered, however, that our suffering, while we can acknowledge it and ask for its amelioration, we won't give it up. We won't give it up to not be men and to be not women. This is important, seeing as to how in these times, with the failings of capitalist and Western promises, the existential threats of climate change, and how this has made dating and reproduction a veritable minefield, we are seeing a rise in certain kinds of masculinized performances between individuals and countries, and a spike in a kind of perverse manhood. As Black people, we can only ever aspire to be let into this regime, as we've been written out of modern Western gender. For us, intracommunally, gender marks how we have been able to violate one another. And being called gendered terms by others has only ever been yet another way of introducing into the overall imaginary other violent means of engaging our bodies and other dehumanizing ways of narrativizing us. Anyways, I'd like to stop here and let us wrestle with some of what I'm proposing and some of what we're seeing. But I would like to continue this conversation with you. Join our Patreon to gain access to our virtual study groups and the reading materials that will be engaging. That way you can see some of the thinkers that we're thinking with and against, and we can enter into a community practice of deep study and deep imagination. I want to say thank you for your support and your perspective. Please like, subscribe, and continue these conversations in your own conversational communities.